Hello and welcome, and this is of course DEJI360. Now these are troubled times for most states in Nigeria. Over 18 out of the 36 we have are having a very difficult time paying salaries. In fact, some are owing for as much as 11 months. In Osun State, for instance, workers there have gone on street protest over unpaid salaries. They have not been paid for over 7 months now. Now, just why have the state governors not been able to pay their workers? They blame it on a shortfall of revenue from the Federation account. The fact is that with global oil prices still failing to pick up as fast as they fell, Nigeria's receipts from oil is still low, and that is taking its toll on the revenue that comes to the government. Don't forget that the bulk of Nigeria's revenue, that's about 75% of it actually, comes from oil. Oil also accounts for over 90% of the country's foreign exchange earnings. The governors are now asking for a bailout from the federal government to enable them pay the backlog of salaries, but they do not seem to be agreed on how to go about it. The APC Governors Forum held a meeting last week, at the end of which they basically asked for a federal bailout. Take a listen now to Imo State Governor Rocha Sokorocha, who's the chairman of the APC's Governors Forum.
We are concerned and worried by the dwindling revenue of the states, which today has affected negatively on the lives of our people. And the matter has become so serious that urgent action must be taken for a bailout for the states, as things are not getting better either. I will sat down to review on what steps could be taken. We are calling for total overhaul of the system to block all the leakages in our nation's economy. And we have realized that what we are going through today is as a result of the poor management of our nation's economy in the recent time. And in fact, the APC government has come to meet a near empty treasury. And this has become very worrisome, not to us only as governors, but I think to the entire nation. While we know that we have some natural challenges, which is the drop in oil price, and secondly, the issue of oil theft. But there are other issues like the crude swap, the gas revenue, which has never reflected on any of the Federation account, and the subsidy mismanagement, which is known to everyone. For instance, only a few years ago, the subsidy amount was about 200 billion, and today is about 1.4 trillion. So what has really changed? So we are really concerned about some of this obvious looting of our nation's treasury.
Now, just days after that meeting by the APC Governors Forum, the enlarged body of state governors in Nigeria, known as Nigeria Governors Forum, met also in Abuja, where they came up with a different proposal altogether.
It's a problem for both federal government and the states. You will believe with me that some of the federal agencies for 5, 6, 4 months, some of them have not gotten their salary. Why? Because federal government cannot do it because of the dwindling of the economy. As we suffer in the states, the same thing. We observe that the federal government is suffering the same fate. So therefore, instead of we to request for the bailout, you have to make sure that the government has liquidity somewhere, but where? So can I just ask federal government do the bailout for us? And sincerely speaking, to some of the experts, this is sending a very, very wrong signal that states are as if they are in the bad shape. But we all know that the economy of the country is in bad shape. So therefore, what we suggested, that many of us, a numerous number of state governors, has executed a various project for the federal government. So instead of looking for that, let us look for the federal government to settle that backlog for us so that we can be able to move forward. Merely all the states, you can have 10 billion, 20 billion, some 30 billion, like Lagos, some more than 50 billion, undertaking the federal project that is not yet settled. So if we can get that done, then most of the issues can be resolved from the states.
He himself is inheriting not just an empty treasury, he's inheriting a huge debt profile. And I imagine that he will need all the luck and all our prayers to be able to overcome the burden that he has inherited as president. So he is not, like I said to somebody, you know, we are in a situation in which the father is critically ill. The child is critically ill. The child needs blood transfusion. Can you get the blood from the father who is also other critical condition? If you do, you might end up killing two persons. So there are no quick answers. It's not that the federal government is so healthy that it can afford. On the other hand, it is the federal government. It has responsibility to keep the system going. So I guess this is an issue we do need to discuss, you know, objectively and see how we can help to keep the Nigeria ship of state sailing and learn a couple of lessons from the current shocks and ensure that never again should we keep quiet and allow few people to help themselves with the national team and then create a situation that is now embarrassing to all of us, including the non-payment of wages, which seems to be the one that everybody seems to know about.
Joining me on the program right now to make sense of what is happening at the moment is Mr. Johnson Chukwu, who is the MD of Carry Asset and also a financial expert. Thank you very much for joining us on the program. Let me start by asking you, what exactly do you make of what is happening in the country today? Quite a number of states not being able to pay salaries.
Well, basic thing is that the governors or the most people are attributing it to the fact that federation allocation has declined by about 30% as a result of the drop in oil prices. But I think it goes beyond that. The basic thing we should be looking at that we're talking of lack of financial prudence, lack of financial planning, or lack of financial knowledge by those who are inspecting the affairs of the states. The few states that have shown prudent financial management are still able to pay salaries. So the basic thing about financial management is that a governor should know that the revenues of the state are not on a smooth trend, that you have fluctuations in revenue, and that when oil prices get to a certain level, they are likely going to drop. So there should have been provisions for periods like this, which is the reason why the Ab initio should have funded the sovereign wealth fund or should have left enough funds in the SS crude account. So for me, the challenge we have today is as a result of lack of sound financial management at the state and maybe to some extent at the federal level.
So you think they are excused that money is actually not coming from the Federation account because of you know, the fall in global oil prices is not tenable?
Yes, for me, I think the fall in the global oil price is what actually exposed the weaknesses in financial management at the state levels. It's not a sufficient reason. Otherwise, all the states, all the 36 states should be paying salaries. We have a state as poor as Edo State that is able to meet all its obligations that went due. The governor of Edo State did say that the state government had paid last month's salary and was not owing its employees. And if you look at the ranking of allocation to the state, the Edo State does not rank highly. Look at the state like Lagos State, where you have prudent financial management. The state is still able to pay salaries. So, of the 36 states of the Federation, there is no simple common attribute that you could say cut across those who are unable to pay salaries. You see some states that get very huge allocations and they are not able to pay salaries. And then you also have states that get very slim allocation and are able to pay salaries. So the only common denominator among them, among those states that are unable to pay salaries, is the fact that they've not managed their finances prudently.
Now, let's look at the workforce of some of these states. Take Osun State, for example, with a workforce of 45,000. Some people will say that's a bloated workforce, and it's quite a surprise that that workforce is not able to, you know, generate revenue that is enough to even pay itself. That then there's a big issue there, don't you think?
Yes, that's what we talk of financial prudence. In the first place, ideally, the recurrent expenditure of a state should be covered by its internally generated revenue. Where a state's internally generated revenue is not enough to meet its recurrent expenditure, then the state is going to be relying on federation allocation to meet basic needs of the state. And the labor force of any state should be in tandem with the level of economic activities in that state. If you have a state that has a bloated labor force but low economic activity, you wonder what those employees are doing. And it is basically the duty of the chief executive of the state to ensure that the level of the number of employees are such an extent that will allow for improved productivity without carrying over bloated wage bill that it cannot be able to meet. So, and that's why I keep saying that the crux of the matter is that of lack of financial prudence.
Let me ask you, I mean, what implication does this have for Nigeria? I'm talking about, does it have any economic implication for Nigeria, especially in the international community? People have been talking about, people have actually been saying that this could, pose some kind of, that it could bring about some kind of negative ratings for Nigeria. I don't know. Can you just help us understand what kind of implication this could have for our economy?
Well, the implication will be basically, to a large extent, limited in terms of economic implication, limited to the subnational level, that is the states that are affected. At the national level, the reputation of the country will be at risk if the country as a nation is unable to meet its obligations to lenders, which is not the case today. We're not talking of Nigeria not being able to meet its obligations to those who are invested in Nigerian government bonds or Nigerian government bills, treasury bills, or Nigerian government sovereign debts. So we're talking of insolvency at the subnational levels. And we've always known, I mean, both local and international investors have always known that the subnationals in the country are not properly structured, that they are not structured to be financially autonomous. They do not have the financial independence or the prudence to manage their affairs fairly well. And that is why for those who lend from international community fund providers to the subnationals always ask for the sovereign guarantee of the country before they lend money to a Nigerian subnational government. Which means what matters is the credit rating of the country and not necessarily the credit rating of the subnational, that's the states.
Now, if this situation continues, don't you think it could also affect the state's ability to meet their debt obligations? Because we know most of them are actually indebted most of them are actually in debt, and they have to pay their debts. But if they are not getting enough money, then there's a problem.
Yes, okay, if you look at what has happened, you saw a drop in allocation by about 30%. Which has constrained the state from meeting, some states from meeting the obligations, some to be categorical, some states are from meeting the obligations. But if you go back and look at the rules, the Securities and Exchange Commission's rules on the limit that the state government can borrow from the bond market, a government cannot borrow more than 50% of its 12 months, preceding 12 months revenue after adjusting for outstanding debt obligation payments. So that means that before the states will get to the point where they are those who have leverage, those who have borrowed from the bond market, where their revenue will not be able to meet their obligations to bondholders, their revenue must have dropped by more than 50% of the preceding 12 months total revenue. Today we're talking about 30%. Basically what is happening is that the 30% drop is such that because obligations to subnational bondholders is deducted as such, it's a fence line deduction from their allocation. That means the central bank will continue to deduct those payments from the statutory allocation of the states and then disburse the net of whatever is left after the deduction to the states. And because the net going to the states is no longer enough to meet their recorded expenditure, that's why the states are having problems. So for the states to get to the point where they will not be able to meet the obligation to the bondholders, their revenue must have dropped to more than to less than 50% of their preceding 12 months revenue at the point the bonds were granted.
Now, let's look at Nigeria as a whole. How does the country get out of this serious cash crunch? Because whether we like it or not, money isn't coming from oil as we expect, and that's the reason why we're having this challenge, even though you're quite right that some of the state governors too have not been very good managers of their resources. But fact is, money is not coming from oil the way it used to. So how does Nigeria deal with this cash crunch? How, for instance, do you expect the Buhari administration to be able to meet those lofty, deliver on those lofty promises it made during the elections?
Well, there is no shortcut to it. If we look at the subnational levels, the appropriate thing for the state governments to do is to improve on their entire generated revenue. The government should expand the tax bracket, and ensure that more people are enter the tax dragnet, that a lot of people who are self-employed, who do not pay tax today, are made to pay taxes. That's what it should be. In most developed economies, the governments run on tax revenue, and there's no reason why governments in Nigeria should not ensure that citizens pay taxes. In the past, in the 70s and early 80s, Nigerian citizens were paying their personal taxes. But unfortunately, today, most of the people that pay taxes at the state levels are those who are in formal employment. That should not be the case. Then at the federal level, if you talk of what the federal government should do, well, beyond that of expanding the coverage and enforcement of tax collections, particularly for the federal level, corporate taxes, withholding taxes, and value-added taxes. And then you also have to look at the government has to discontinue with waivers that are granted by customs or on importation and some of those waivers, so as to minimize income leakages. But the most critical thing the government can do at this stage is this. Let's address the issue of oil theft in the Niger Delta. Let's minimize the frequency of bridging of oil pipeline that lead to shorting. Today, we are producing about 1.9 million barrels. Ideally, the country will be producing about 2.23 million barrels per day. That shortfall of close to 400,000 barrels is part of the reasons why we're having revenue shortfall. If you consider the fact that the budget of the country was predicated on $53 per barrel, and we're currently doing about between $63 and $65. So we should be talking of excess crude revenue if we're able to meet our volume target. But because we are shy of the volume target, we're having a deficit in our revenue, despite the fact that crude oil price is trading above our benchmark, budgeted benchmark. So the government needs to do something quickly to reduce the leakages associated with crude production, the oil theft, level of oil theft, the level of oil pipeline breaches, and the level of shorting by oil producers as a result of breach of their pipelines.
So obviously, it's surely going to be a very difficult one for Muhammadu Buhari and his team to deliver.
It's going to be very challenging, but the government is a continuum. I think the best thing is to start now to address some of these weaknesses. Like I mentioned, there's no quick win, there's no shortcut to addressing the fundamental weaknesses of the structure of the government revenue.
Let me just ask you one final question. What's your take on the controversy in the National Assembly over the budget now for the allowances for the lawmakers? I mean, the wardrobe allowances, we're hearing figures of around 9 billion naira, for instance, at such a time that Nigeria is facing such a severe cash crunch.
Well, it's good that it's coming up because we've always known, if you cast your mind, we've always known that the National Assembly's expenditure profile is overbloated. If you cast your mind back at when Sanusi Lamido was the CBN governor, he made an issue out of this for which they invited him and he said he was ready to resign because he had his facts. And he was going to state the facts as they are, that the amount that is being appropriated to by the National Assembly is far beyond what should ordinarily be expended on a National Assembly that is made up of less than 600 citizens, when what goes to them is as high as what goes to the rest of the populace. It's good that we are, maybe because as a result of the Freedom of Information Bill, that we're beginning to see each of these express heads. And I think the National Assembly has a moral duty, even if the Revenue Mobilization and Fiscal Commission is allowing them to go with that. They have a moral duty to cut down on the expenditure profile, given the dire financial strait of the country today.
But overall, do you think things are going to get worse for Nigeria before they get better?
Well, I think things are already bad, but what I know that may happen is that the currency may further be devalued, because today the central bank does not have the financial muscle, the reserve, to meet the demand for forex. So I think that devaluation may have to happen, and that will have negative economic implications on citizens in terms of inflation. Inflation, we're already talking about 9%. In terms of standard of living, those things are going to worsen before the economy will pick up properly.
So Johnson Chukwu, thank you very much for your thoughts.
My
and
pleasure.
Thank you for joining us on the program. We'll take a short break now. When we come, we'll continue the discussion. Every day, every hour, and every minute, news break in Nigeria. Things happen so fast, it's most times difficult to track and comprehend them. But that's what we do right here on DEJI360. 2015, would you want to come back again?
It's like asking Jesus Christ if he knew he was going to die, will you want to come back as the savior of the world again?
We do not just help you track the stories, we break them down, explore all the angles, analyze the issues so that you can fully comprehend the stories and use them to make the right decisions.